Okay, finally it's 15 past, quarter past 1, so let's start. My name is Jesper and I'm the director of the Seedbox program, and we're very honored to welcome all of you here today, of course, and also we're very honored to have here today our Seedbox visiting scholar this month in February, which is Mirko Nikolić, and it's great to have him here. And Mirko holds a PhD in arts and media practices, right? From University of Westminster in London. And he's here for a month, as I said, and he's been been engaged in questions of extractivism and stuff like that. And he has a very long title on his talk or seminar today, so I won't say the whole of it, but I can read it on the screen, of course. And it's How Like a Rock, a shared conversation between anti-extractivism and queer feminist materialism, which is what he's going to talk about today and share with us today.
But thanks so much for coming, and so exciting that the whole program is here, I guess. And especially because this is really relating to, I hope, some things that you are working with. So I will try to finish maybe by 2-ish, and then hopefully we can have a larger shared conversation, actually. I will show, this will be more like I work between, or in a kind of continuum of art practice and critical writing. So it's kind of a indistinct and blurry zone, but today I will speak more maybe through theory, but on the other hand, because I tend always to somehow, when talking about especially, about anybody or bodies, especially other than human bodies, I think it's really important to have them as close as possible, so to speak with them, which is very similar to Isabel Stengers's notion of cosmopolitics. So I don't have any rocks and minerals here with me, but I will show on the back there will be a running film, which is basically which is part of another project which looked into specifically extraction and mining of copper, metallurgy and recycling. So this will be in some ways to give us the ground, to be the ground what I'm saying, because otherwise I think it might just hang a bit in the air. So How Like a Rock, a shared conversation between anti-extractivism and queer feminist materialism. So this story starts, and I will start actually by saying with whom I'm speaking here and how this all comes about. So it's in the middle of a process, actually, which started in 2015 with the project We Love Copper and Copper Loves Us. That was supported by Helsinki International Artist Program, KC Belgrade, and Mustarind Association, as well as EU Culture Fund. Then in 2017, it was continued with Earth, Others, Heart, Earth, supported by Mustarind Association, and now it's mostly developing thanks to a Kone Foundation grant. And the research project which runs under the name What Do Rare Earths Deeply Want? And specifically in this project, what I'm talking about today is developed in conversation with Elin, Maro and Vister, artist duo AKCG, Alex Wilson, Prabha Pillar and Anush Vaidya. So they're all somehow here. So back to the title, How Like a Rock takes up title of Donna Haraway's book from How Like a Leaf, Book of Conversations. And likewise, shared conversation, of course, refers to the core quality of situated knowledge, as theorized by Donna Haraway again. So I will try to pull some strings between some discourses that are currently being developed in the field of anti-extractivism, and I will get into that first. And then also conversations around queer and feminist materialisms, new materialism, but also historical materialism. So in order to create or to begin a conversation, actually, which I think is to a large degree still a bit underground. There are genealogies and crossovers, but I think that they're not so visible yet. And this is also first draft of this specific thinking, so I'm really happy to talk about this afterwards, to hear your thoughts. And of course, like it's usually said, but whenever you feel like there is something a bit unclear, just stop me, please. Really. So, what do we understand by extractivism? There are many ways of approaching this issue, but I will start with a very formal definition given by Alberto Acosta, who is an Ecuadorian economist, former Minister of Energy and Mines in Ecuador, and former member and president of the Constituent Assembly of Ecuador. So we start from the southern hemisphere, and then actually I will try to ground the discourse in the here and now, where we are sitting. So, quote, this is a bit of a longer quote, but I think it's important to start from there. Extractivism is a mode of accumulation that started to be established on a massive scale 500 years ago. The world economy, the capitalist system, began to be structured with the conquest and colonization of the Americas, Africa, and Asia. This extractivist mode of accumulation has been determined ever since by the demands of the metropolitan centers of nascent capitalism. Some regions specialized in the extraction and production of raw materials, primary commodities, while others took on the role of producing manufactured goods. The former export nature, the later imported. In an attempt to arrive at a comprehensible definition, we will use the term extractivism to refer to those activities which remove large quantities of natural resources that are not processed or processed only to a limited degree, especially for export. Extractivism is not limited to minerals or oil. Extractivism is also present in farming, forestry, and even fishing. Today, the question of renewable natural resources must be approached in the light of recent developments and trends. Because of the huge scale of extraction, many renewable resources, such as forests or soil fertility, are becoming non-renewable. This is because the resource is depleted with the rate of extraction much higher than the rate at which the environment is able to renew the resource. Thus, at the current pace of extraction, the problems of non-renewable natural resources may equally affect all resources, renewable or not. This was written in 2013. I will now move to the north and speak about anti-extractive practices here in Sweden. So I will briefly read through three manifestos of three anti-mining groups active currently in Sweden and see how they relate to this question. I translate them from Swedish, so it might be a bit, well, it's helped actually, sorry, by Marika Trill in this. So hopefully it comes close to the original intents. So Urbergsgruppen, which could be translated as the bedrock group, is an association working for long-term management of the Earth's natural resources and for reduced extraction of finite raw materials from the Earth's crust. The association shall work for the rights of nature and the local population to maintain and protect their long-term living conditions, land, water, nature and culture, now and for the future. A home for Rädda Vättern, action to save Vättern. Vättern is a massive lake very close to here, second largest lake I think in Sweden. So ARV shall protect and safeguard Vättern as water source, a good environment for residents, a good recreational environment for residents and visitors, a sustainable ecosystem, conditions for sustainable regional development. And lastly, we have Fältbiologerna, which is the youth nature association in Sweden, or field biologists literally. They have a very interesting, they're one of the few, I think the only actually national organization for environment which has actually a group Politiska program, which is the program on mining politics. So it's really interesting, but I'm just reading one bit of it. Mineral consumption today is high and it is increasing. It is not possible to continue to increase mining. The negative environmental impacts are too big for it to be tenable. Society needs a broader understanding of the eco-cycle when it comes to minerals and mining products. Sweden must introduce a much more restrictive mineral law that takes into account the finite nature of minerals and mining's extreme environmental impact. The mining boom is a global issue that affects the environment and locals throughout the world. It is wrong to use other countries' mining, and Sweden must take responsibility for the mining issue nationally and globally. And to just situate this, because I realize now that maybe not everyone here lives in Sweden or even in the north of Europe. Sweden and Finland, as well as Norway, the whole of Fennoscandia is currently engaged in a comprehensive mining boom, which has been going on in Sweden since actually 1990s, in Finland since 2000s, but essentially a bit surprisingly for me, because I come from Southeast Europe, actually both Sweden and Finland are one of the most attractive destinations in the world for mining industry at the moment. Yeah, so this is the kind of larger frame of why there is now an increasing number of organizations that work actually against this, even though they've started basically in 2010s. Before that, mining was, from what I've learned, not one of the key questions of ecological politics in Sweden, but now it's becoming so. So in solidarity with these manifestos and in alliance with them, I would like to go beyond the, so to say, standardized political legal discourse currently used in the European Union, and also these statements have stayed mostly within the realm of, let's say, of environmental politics and law, and they use this type of technical terminology. Well, I would like to transpose this and relate these practices to the other practices and ontological claims such as water is life, nivikoni, used by First Nations, for example, the Standing Rock in the USA in the struggle against oil extractivism, or another statement such as let the mountains live, voiced in a recent moratorium on Nasavari Mountain, proclaimed by Svaipa, Semisjaur, Njair, Granen, Saltfjär reindeer herding communities. So I believe that most of these organizations active in Sweden actually share these similar ideas, but they do not voice them also in these, let's say, ontological terms. But I will move the conversation towards these considerations as well. And why I think it's important to have now this conversation between queer feminist materialism and environmental humanities and anti-extractivism as a broad field of struggle is because struggles around extraction and mining of fossil fuels and also mineral resources is one of the front lines of climate struggle, best expressed by Naomi Klein's and 350.org's formula, keep it in the ground. It is because water, earth and climate defenders stand at this historical juncture, but also effectively for the previous 5 centuries. They're the first ones standing on the frontier of the capitalist expansion into other than human nature and the social as well, as I'll go to explicate. So now I'll go to the beginning of this actually, because I think when speaking about these issues, it's actually essential to really have to go into the history, both of the earth. So to consider these elements have been forged billions of years ago and millions of years ago, but also to look at the kind of to flatten the history. And here I'm using quantum feminist methodologies, so that's actually past, present, and future are continuously being cut and recut and reconfigured. So I would like to start by putting this conversation back now into the European context, North European context, and Carolyn Merchant's book, The Death of Nature from 1980, already expands specifically on how nature in the early modernity, in 16th and 17th century in Europe, moves from being, let's say that the philosophies of nature move from, are spun between 2 main paradigms, nurturing mother and object of domination. And these competing metaphors were actually being discussed and fought by various means in the early modernity. And Merchant goes to expand on how the modern science actually signifies the prevailing paradigm of nature as object of domination. And another important, and I will start from another book, I'll go a bit more in detail, with, from Silvia Federici's The Caliban and the Witch, where she goes really into detail into how this organicist or organism vision of the earth in the Middle Ages is violently extirpated through witch hunts, specifically, and then colonial and imperial genocides and ecocides across the world. This is really important because we can then see with Federici that actually extraction is always concerns earth and the bodies, and how the nascent capitalism and modern science of that time actually tries to colonize both. Into a regime of discipline of labor power and natural domination. Quote, just as nature is reduced to a great machine and could be conquered, in Francis Bacon's words, penetrated in all her secrets, likewise the body, emptied of its occult forces, could be caught in a system of subjection whereby its behavior could be calculated, organized, technically thought, and invested of power relations. This last bit was from Foucault, and this is from Federici. So in Descartes, body and nature are identified, for both are made of same particles and act in obedience to uniform physical laws set in motion by God's will. And lastly, quoting still from Federici, the same relation that the capital introduced between land and work was also beginning to command the relation between the body and labor. So in this obsessive attempt to conquer the body, capital and science, but then we won't go here into details because these stories don't proceed at the same pace, but essentially ideas travel in specific circles in the 16th and 17th century Europe. So there is this idea of actually, on the one hand, conquering human nature, what the theme that was discussed in those times. So what is this human nature problematic? And at the same time, how to conquer other than human nature. And this becomes this struggle to conquer the body by the power of the mind. It becomes correlated with industrial appropriation and colonization. So following Federici, proletarianization and colonization of the European and indigenous peoples and lands do not stand in one-to-one relation. This would be a historical injustice to say so, but they are intersected processes of the empire that asserts itself from essentially from the expansion of Europe into the other onto the other continents. And what is really crucial in Federici's analysis, because I'm trying to here speak to Europe and from a European viewpoint, is that actually also deep into the 16th and 17th century and even beyond, that there was this massive power and disciplinary operation to actually destroy a specific set of ideas as well, and effectively to destroy the bodies as well that carried them. But again, the witch hunts have not entirely raised alternative ontologies of Earth, even in Europe. In folk beliefs in the north, but also in other parts of Europe, even up to the quite high modernity, even up to the 1900s, one can still find traces of the animacy and liveliness of the earth. So this is just to testify that actually this terrain has never been fully conquered, which is also important in order to understand, I think, the current struggles. To wrap up this historical analysis, I think, to reiterate also that extractivism, or this mode of capitalist accumulation asserted by modernity, has always been about bodies and minds, natures and cultures. And of course, this relates now to a broader set of analysis of ecofeminism, early ecofeminism in the 1980s and 1990s, and especially Walt Plumwood's analysis of entangled histories and presence of the dualisms. But to kind of now move from the early modernity to today, and to add another strata in the manifestations of this mode of accumulation. I think it's also essential to acknowledge that now the struggle between extractivism and other worldviews is at its most intense because the thirst for minerals is higher than ever on the one hand, and this relates specifically to the information and communication technologies, to the digital economy, to which I will return in a second, and also on the other hand, and in conjunction, intersection with this, digital economy also marks the moment where there is this comprehensive plugging into the cognitive realm of into the territories of extraction. So with Franco Biffo Berardi, soul is put at work. So together with mining itself, which is something we see here, one of the most dramatic manifestations of extractive thought and practice today is for example, is essentially big data, as manifested in the workings of Apple, Amazon, Google, Facebook, and Microsoft, and other stacks, black stacks. So the conceptualization of data mining is extremely precise reflection of this continuity that runs actually from the ground, from the extraction of minerals, and then ends up at the screen as well. So it's not only a material continuity, because of course minerals keep running all these devices, but also it is a discursive set which actually operates still in a very similar set of premises, that something can be resourced. And in this case, these are ideas, affects, and everything else that runs through the wires essentially, and that we think of as information or communication. So there's this actually territory actually which binds together, I think, ever closer the cognitive and the earth. So to an extent, as Federici speaks about this discovery of new territories in the body, but also which goes in conjunction with the discovery of the infamous formula is the New World in 15 and 1600s. It is somehow also we can actually extend this also into the discoveries of ever more territories actually within the cognitive and affective, which actually are, for example, accomplished through social media mining and so on. And in fact, digital economy actually has been able to grow so astonishingly to some degree because it was able to assert itself somehow outside the paradigms of the limits to growth or even planetary boundaries, because at the moment when these ideas were questioned, the 70s and 80s, actually there is this rise of digital and informational economy which seemed to operate beyond this structure of physical boundaries. But in fact, Mark Zuckerberg's mantra is that users will share more and more. So there is this endless territory, and this is exactly the same type of ideology that was being used by settler colonial Europeans in the North America, South America, and Australia, where everything seemed to be just there for taking more and more, essentially. So now let's kind of switch from this dominant type of narrative into or this kind of state of things, and move into something which I like to call analytics of the possible, and to kind of trace some lines of deterritorialization of this, and specifically eco-queer feminist line of deterritorialization of this kind of politics into a more than human realm. And of course, we have to point out that, like, for example, one of the manifestations of minor cosmologies of, for example, active Earth that have resurfaced recently can be found, for example, in that in a way have survived witch hunts, have resurfaced in the 1980s. We can read that Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari say that, quote, metallurgy is the consciousness or thought of the matter flow, and metal the correlate of this consciousness. As expressed in panmetalism, metal is coextensive to the whole of matter, and the whole of matter to metallurgy. Even the waters, the grasses, and varieties of wood, the animals are populated by salts or mineral elements. Not everything is metal, but metal is everywhere. Metal is the conductor of all matter. so with Deleuze and Guattari we can and they of course are part of a living genealogy, so it's just a moment in this long history of minor cosmologies of active Earth. We can see that actually for them metal gains this vibrant materialist qualities, and effectively then, for example, more recently Jane Bennett develops this line of thought into think power, and Manuel de Landa in 1990 speaks about non-organic life. So there is the vibrant materialism is an important lineage of queer and feminist materialisms of today. But however, I will also take another route here actually, because I think that to some degree we have to also acknowledge that this insistence on life, movement, and power in the thought of Deleuze and Guattari, Jane Bennett, de Landa, and others, actually runs very close to recreating another binary, and the one that is between life and non-life, because to some degree this mode of thinking can actually end up privileging liveliness, and I think, and now it's recently pointed out by Elizabeth Povinelli, where she describes the current stage of extractive capitalism, or G onto power, she says. She explains this with the following formula, that life, and here life, there are two brackets. Is there? Maybe I should write this actually. So life, and in between the brackets there is birth, growth, reproduction, is put against death, versus death. So this is the formula of biopolitics and necropolitics. But this whole vast region of existence, which is all on the life side, so even life and death is still on the life, is pitched actually against non-life. And this is really important. Let's try to keep this in mind, specifically because here I'm not criticizing, for example, also we should keep in mind that what I'm talking now is really Northern European mode of thinking, so I'm not at all here referring or even at all criticizing indigenous ontologies, because they make a difference between animate and inanimate, specifically North American First Nations. So I'm speaking to this tradition of thinking, which kind of still makes distinction between life and non-life. So there is a certain sense in which there is a biopolitical bias, and we could even say that this creates some sort of state of exception, to say it with Agamben, in regards to non-life. But however, with Povinelli, and she speaks with the Aboriginal worldview. Actually, this is a very dangerous kind of exclusion if we stay only with the life, essentially. So even though the vibrant matter of Jane Bennett and Deleuze and Guattari is an obvious contention to mechanistic and extractivist onto power, I will trace another line actually through old and new materialism, and let's say that I think that in order to create another constellation of terms, I think it might be more intense actually to invoke Alaimo's notion of transcorporeality, for example, and this also to open to another range of new materialist positions. So also Nancy Tuana's interactionism and the notion of viscous porosity, which she specifically develops in relation to her situated analysis of Hurricane Katrina's asymmetrical devastation of New Orleans. So to quote Nancy Tuana here, quote, viscous is neither fluid nor solid, but intermediate between them. Attention to the porosity of interactions helps us to undermine the notion that distinctions, as important as they might be in particular contexts, signify a natural or unchanging boundary, a natural kind. So specifically, Nancy Tuana is concerned with the, quote, the viscous porosity of the category is natural, human-made, social, biological. This goes in line with the figurations of new post-humanist subjectivity, in line, for example, with Rosie Baidotti's critical post-human subject. But again, I will stay now specifically with this, let's say, mode of new materialism, which is the one concerned with transcorporeality, entangled responsibility, accountability, and then actually grounded in toxicity, vulnerability, exposure, as well as radical hospitality. And I will try now to actually dramatize, to say it with Deleuze, Marx and Engels' injunction that actually in the Communist Manifesto that, quote, all hitherto non-history of each society is a history of class struggle. I would like now to kind of start modifying and talking and querying the notion of class struggle and to diffract it with class organizing or assembling and interactivity across the species lines. Because I think that there is no, while acknowledging the situating of the analysis of the class struggle within the social, I think when we start moving into the post-humanist continuum between the nature and culture, I think we also need to kind of acknowledge that there is actually no class to begin with. There is always a process of assembling or iterative assembly of something called class, and I hope to get to it by the end of this line of thinking. So this is to follow actually Deleuze's crystallization of actually Foucault's theory of power. Actually, he says simply, resistance comes first. And I see this as essentially referring to actually geo and bio and zoo power, and also to carry Wolff's definition of posthumanism as that comes before and after humanism. And I think there is a lot of thinking now about what comes after humanism, but I think it is crucial to hold this also before humanism, and this to speak to both. So Marxist analyses are based on the construction of a subject and object. So there is a subject which is proletarian, and object is a revolution essentially, or social change. But again, how does this work in a field of post-humanist, more than human activity? It is a bit less obvious when we think about exposed bodies as not only human, and specifically when we look at Earth others, and other types of possibly even proletarians. So to kind of, I think that we now start by following Adrienne Rich's feminist politics allocation injunction, which is to always ask once again, who is we? And this is especially salient in the view of generalizations, some assumptions that are kind of developed around the notion of Anthropocene. So I won't go into that. And also, at this stage, I cannot really wade into deep waters of Marxist class theory, but it's really just about opening a territory of shared conversation, and also acknowledging the work of post-Marxist scholars, which have already done a lot of work to actually reconfigure the notion of the worker as the principal agent of struggle, specifically through the histories of colonization. So to acknowledge that actually some of the major social formations who are involved in what we could call class struggle actually do not belong only to workers, but they are dispossessed and people who were never even part of the workforce or could not be and would not be, on the one hand, and also to relate this to this broader field of activity which actually is more than human Earth. So this is also to unsettle the Hannah Arendt's schema actually, which traces back to the Greeks, where actually there is a division between labor as only biological processes, work as homo faber, and politics as a kind of specifically human activity. And actually to kind of propose a bit different analytics, and here and to think of ecology or more than human mode of thought as actually as necessarily always a minoritarian politics. And here I like to remind us of Jean-François Lyotard's genealogy of the word ecology, to kind of transform that term as well, because ecology is usually still related to oikos as home, and also oikonomia, which means then economy of the home, and that's the kind of maybe majoritarian line of environmental kind of thinking. But Lyotard argues actually that home, quote, is not the place of safety. Oikos is above all the place of tragedy. And what he is talking about is essentially that family home is a place of the oikoien, the secluded. And in this case, study from the Greeks, but also with a continuity until today, this refers specifically to women, slaves, animals, plants that are under the control of the master of the household, domus. So ecology does not refer to something outside, actually, or the environment as understood in modernity, but actually, with Lyotard, quote, ecology is a discourse of an otherness that is not an Umwelt, environment at all, but this otherness that is at the core of the apparatus. So ecology talks about what is captured in the logic of domination exercised by the patriarchal and phagocentric modes of thought and power relations. And it talks to the minoritarian bodies, which are all the supporting bodies that actually keep both economy and politics actually running. And here it's also important to kind of start transgressing this binary of economy as something belonging to household, as a private affair, and politics as something public. And this is another way of saying, what Lyotard is doing is essentially another way of saying or staying with feminist analysis of housework and home as primary site of politics, and the complicated developments of the left that is still in somehow process of absorbing this actually. But I think that ecology adds to these conversations, and this type of minoritarian ecology specifically, as another type of thinking that politics and economy are actually not what kind of modernity wants them to be, but they speak about free and unappropriated affects of a multitude of beings that are not part or are only partially part of the apparatus of extraction or capitalism. So together with the analytics of class within the existing conditions of capitalism, it is also about tracing and understanding multiple belongings to extra-capitalist conceptions of class, because then I think we can start kind of retracing with the contours of climate justice and multi-species politics. And the central territory of these discursive and material contentions that I would like to develop here revolve actually around the notion of agency. And there is actually seemingly a sharp divide between, for example, Marxist understandings of agency and for example, the work of Karen Baradz and her agential realism. And I would like to develop that because in standard Marxist analysis, of course, agency is held by a specific set of bodies and human bodies. But with Karen Baradz and the larger queer new materialist field, one does not start actually from a body or the bodies, but actually from interaction or the in-between. In Karen Baradz's agential realism, the primary ontological units are phenomena, so not things or objects or even subjects. So phenomena refer to, the quote, the ontological inseparability and entanglement of interacting agency. And only upon this ontological inseparability is premised, quote, agential separability, the condition of exteriority within phenomena. So quantum agential realism is one of the many challenges to the modern conceptions of identity and the self. And it is clear that quantum non-identity has a lot to kind of contest in regards to understandings of assemblages of institutions, but also subjectivity. However, I think that actually talking through this set of terms, the quantum terms, actually we can start effectively, actually, they not apparently seem to relate directly to the political struggles of today, but they do. They do not regard only electrons, actually, quite the other way around, actually. So let's rock now. So what are the, I'm mainly concerned, what are the ripple effects on climate politics by agential realist proposition that, for example, with Karen Baradz, nature is performative and queerly so. Nature develops her notion of queer performativity of nature in 2012 in reference to a set of phenomena such as lightnings that strike from the sky, amoebas, and electrons as well. But I'm interested really how to now move this analytics into these territories also, like effective struggle around the issues around destinies of rocks and mining. So how to follow an example from artistic practice, artist researcher Jonathan Kemp talks about their practice as an attempt to liberate the crystals from, quote, the digital crystallization of the flesh by capital, which limits futures to the point of exhaustion. And Kemp works specifically by liberating literally metals and elements from by dismantling computers, hardware. So it's a very material type of practice. But at the same time, of course, material and discursive and entangled. So if we consider capitalism as the extractive capitalism, as the machinery of appropriation of pasts, think oil, presence as labor power and nature, and future through depth and climate, for example, quantum agential realism opens up to the fact that possibilities are being reconfigured, and all these possibilities, of course, of past, present, and future, through situated interactions. So these past, present, and futures are not foreclosed, even though there is this huge attempt to actually to crystallize them and foreclose them or enclose them. So there is this constant interactivity of all sorts of bodies that actually mean that actually resistance does come first. And to kind of start thinking about this type of politics in a different way, I think I'll try now to trace some implications of quantum agential realism and queer feminist materialism to climate politics. For example, by claiming that together with politics, economy, and law, which are currently the main sides of struggle, I would try to actually kind of open up at least two other sides of struggle. And one relates to, and I will start with the sexual politics, so how is sexuality a side of struggle in a kind of more than human climate justice context. So I would like to claim that actually climate justice struggle are struggles around politics of desire as well. And here we could refer to Spinoza's understanding of desire as each man's nature or essence, its endeavor to persist in its being. And in fact, Spinoza recognizes that actually at least animals are animated by desire, but I'm including here other earth others as well. Joyful meetings among bodies form what Spinoza calls common notions, which are relations of agreement, of joyful agreement between bodies. And so I think that this is one important way of looking at commoning with other bodies across the species lines as well. And in fact, I'll come back to that later, but I think that some of the current problematic and entanglement of human bodies with the metal and the earth can be and must be understood actually to the politics of desire as well, and yearning as well, as another important concept. And here yearning becomes political as an affect feeling, which Bell Hooks condenses with her vision of liberatory black feminist consciousness as, quote, desire for radical social change that is intimately linked with the desire to experience pleasure, erotic fulfillment, and a host of other passions, end of quote. And I'm encouraged also to invoke here yearning into a more than human climate justice politics by its transposition of posthumanist register by Karen Barad, where she emphasized that yearning is a material force that actually animates other types of bodies. And in her analysis of quantum field theory, Barad says that, speaking about electrons specifically, quote, don't for a minute think that there are no material effects of yearning and imagining. So yearning and desiring, without even going into the binaries of life and non-life and consciousness or mind, body, I think there are very different types of terms that actually can be used to think about the politics of desire in a very different way than the standard social, let's say. And it can kind of contribute to radically dramatizing and actually queering Deleuze and Guattari's actually early understanding of politics in Anti-Oedipus, where they say, quote, "There is only desire and the social, and nothing else." Here, of course, social, I'm taking it as a more than human social, but I think that then desire becomes really crucial element, and because then desire crosses across the three ecologies, as later proposed by Guattari. So it does cross the mental, social, and environmental. And in fact, I think it is valid to ask questions such as, what do Earth others deeply desire and yearn for? And I think it is essential in order to think politics as a mode of actual negotiation between heterogeneous bodies and multiple desires and yearnings. So climate politics is also sexual politics, and I think it relates also to politics of trans-species libidinal liberation in anti-normative and anti-hierarchical keys. And here I will invoke ecosexuals specifically, Annie Sprinkle and Beth Stevens, hailing from California, artists and researchers who have developed the notion of sex ecology. And just a short quote from their ecosexual manifesto is the quote, "Earth is our lover. We are aquaphiles, terraphiles, spirophiles, and aerophiles. We caress rocks, are pleasured by waterfalls, and admire the earth's curves often. We make love with the earth through our senses. We celebrate our e-spots. We are very dirty." End quote. So human bodies in all their difference are not the only ones with privileged access, sensual access to other bodies. And in fact, for example, Karen Barat has a wonderful example of a starfish who sees and touches actually with the entire body. Its entire body is vision and touch. So these notions kind of collapse into a synesthetic experience of a total kind of sensuality with the environment. And Karen Barat also in her article Trans Materialities points out also that the behavior of electrons in quantum field is actually really wild, and that they basically electrons essentially continuously experiment with their with different identities in some ways. So they're made of virtual configurations, reconfigurations that express themselves through self-touching the other. There is this even in the kind of micro electronic field, which is the kind of the basis of materiality. There is this ontological indeterminacy, a radical openness, and an infinity of possibilities, which challenge continuously the idea of a fixed identity. How do all these understandings of a broader understanding of desire and yearning, how this comes back to a post-disciplinary multi-species politics? Again, it really destabilizes and deterritorializes any understanding of politics and law, which is based on a specific type of subjectivity, because as we just saw, there are very many different types of interactivity. And so this has implications for the studies of science, as obviously developed in feminist technoscience studies and the work of Karen Barat, but also Nina Likes, Cecilia Osbeer, Marietta Radomska, Donna Haraway, Astrid Schroeder, and many others. This has crucial implications also for art production. So art is not anymore, one has to understand also that other agencies are partners in the making of etc. And there is a lot of work around that as well. But now, I'd like to come back also again to just the idea of like to open other front after saying that actually this type of thinking really has implications for like sexual politics in the broader sense. I'll go back again to labor politics and see how we can now kind of bring these terms to actually really add another front line or frontier to the conventional labor politics or leftist Marxist tradition of labor politics, because it is considered to be one of the main struggles of again sites of struggle against extraction. So I think here it's crucial to kind of think, I would like to rethink the labor politics through the notion of social reproduction, and to develop a little bit, to sketch out what an earth reproduction, of terran reproduction would mean, in line with the queer and feminist materialisms that I invoked so far, and ecofeminism as well. So here it's good to kind of start with plants, actually, and only then because they're, for many reasons, but because essentially, to put it materially, because they are the mediators and this middle zone between the mineral realm and the animal world, let's say, but also because that is the vegetals are the 90% of biomass on the earth, or 98%, sorry. So it is actually the largest, the most important type of organism on Earth. So what do they have to say to labor politics, actually? So well, already Charles Darwin actually recognized queer and sexual agency of orchids in their strategies to attract pollinators. So plants do affect other beings via various means, sensual means, by producing scents, but also being able to sculpt flowers, because it is kind of extraordinary to think that actually it's obvious, but also important to kind of keep in mind that flowers are not are a mode of expression. I mean, plants do not see conventional seeing. So flowers are something that is, it's a type of art for other types of audiences, and so they cross dramatically their sensorium in order to express themselves in a mode which they cannot actually even somehow perceive. So it is vegetal is an art which is actually radically trans-species, and even trans-kingdom, actually, if you want to stay with these ideas of kingdoms, plant and animal. So these affections that plant produce contain strong aesthetic components directed at animals and able to captivate entire cultures, actually, as Michael Pollan nicely explains. So they produce fields of affect that are actualized through inter-kingdom, cross-species molecular interactions, and they go toward dominant biological explanations. So as Carla Hustek and Natasha Myers ask, referring to the interactions between bees and orchids, they ask, quote, "What if the topology of insect-orchid encounters were conditioned not just by a calculating economy that aims to maximize fitness, but also by an affective ecology shaped by pleasure, play, and experimental propositions?" End quote. So what is social reproduction when situated in a modern human social, and where reproduction is actually nature's queer performativity, where even electrons, but all plants are involved in constant experimentation with self-touching the bodies, theirs and others, and also plants, animals, and rocks as well. For example, J.J. Coyne, in his book Stone, Ecology of the Inhuman, indicates a myriad ways in which European medieval women and men got themselves involved in the stories of with stones and rocks, because stones invoke, and medieval writings invoke wonder and charm. Humans, and they possess occult, or we could say magical, special powers. So it's also about kind of in this historical flattened, I would say, mode of analysis. I think we shouldn't also necessarily look at these pre-modern types of knowledge as merely superstitions, but they're actually relational ontologies. They are shared conversations and entanglements between in this case, lithic and non-lithic bodies, so between stones and humans. And this relates to actually Elizabeth Povinelli's call to try to really, as an imperative for politics of today, to try to exit carbon imaginary, which is predicated on the life-death distinction and does not even see non-life. Coming back to rocks here, it is in the Middle Ages and previously, actually, starting from the first encounters of humans with metals specifically, there has been an understanding in which rocks come into being through some sort of reproduction inside the earth. And for example, Albertus Magnus is an early scientist in the 13th century. In his book, De Mineralibus, he explains that just as in animal seed, there comes a force capable of forming an animal, which forms and produces an animal. So, in materials suitable for stones, there is a power that forms and produces stones and develops the form of this stone or that. So, Albertus Magnus is part of a larger field of thinking that goes all the way to the modernity and the development of modern science, which actually tries to understand Earth actually as some sort of engaged in some sort of sexual reproduction, and that was one of the dominant theories of mineral formation, crystallization, was that principles, different types of principles, mainly male and female, but not only, meet and intermix, and then they create crystals. So the world was sexualized because, actually, the entire world was sexualized because, as Mircea Eliade explains, from anthropological point of view, this was in order to understand, actually, how to actually describe the liveliness or the whole earth as living. But this, of course, to us is pre-pseudoscience or even pre-science or prehistorical science to some degree. But it takes a surprising turn where actually we look at a recent theory proposed by astrophysicist and geologist David Hazen, which is the theory of mineral evolution. And for this, I'm indebted to Monica Backe. So the theory of mineral evolution actually kind of challenges the dominant understanding of mineralogy and, as a division. The minerals are currently, if you go to any natural history museum, you will see that minerals are divided by through their physical properties, physical and chemical. So there are sulfides, chlorides, sulfides, and so on. So they are analyzed in terms of their basically topography, let's say. So there is no, they're not classified by their history, actually. And David Hazen, with a team of researchers, published in 2008 this paper, which is groundbreaking, which claims actually that, which tries to look at minerals as part of evolution of the Earth. So the chief finding is that actually around 2/3 of mineral species on Earth developed in interaction with life. So before the beginning of life, there was a certain set of around 1,500, I think, minerals. And since the advent of life up to today, now we have around 4,300 minerals. And each year there are more species being found. But essentially, mineral evolution, and this is already a striking term, I think, is profoundly involved with organic processes. This is not to say that increasing mineral diversity is the ultimate goal or intention of this planet necessarily, but it is that actually the geodiversity probably on Earth is unique because of life. And actually, most of these minerals have developed in relation to life, so they do not exist on places such as that do not contain life or life as we know it on Earth. So this proximity of bios and geos actually has been going on for at least, I have to look at that, but I think 2.5 billion years. That's the time of the co-evolution of geo and biosphere. So, I think this is really essential to kind of put these natural and biological histories really in conversation actually together, and which means that actually all these other fields that are involved before, science, art, social sciences of course, but also libidinal politics and labor politics, have to somehow deal with this actually. how, and in this last part, I'll just kind of try to briefly sketch out how. I'm actually running out of time, but so I would like to kind of think now what would be this idea of Earth reproductive labor that actually could create a specifically eco-queer feminist territory for climate justice politics and earth justice, water justice. So if we look at the one in the instantiation of reproductive labor as a, we started, I think, and the ground of analysis is domestic labor and housework, as developed in the 70s and 80s by second wave feminism, wages for housework, Maria da Costa and Silvio Federici. But reproductive labor has assumed also new, at least theoretically, it has become more obvious that in the 90s and 2000s, in relation to the digital economy, it has developed and encompasses also immaterial labor now, which is developed by post-autonomist philosophers such as Maurizio Lazzarato, where immaterial labor, quote, produces first and foremost a social relationship, end quote. So it's mostly labor that relates to communication, but also affective labor. So this is the labor in the bodily mode, caring labor. So I think that specifically when we look at affective labor and we relate this to the genealogy, this minor genealogy of understanding of more than human Earth, I think it is really important to start tracing the specifics of what affective labor as production and reproduction of affect means in a natural cultural form as a kind of multi-species commoning community, or something that refers to something which is bio-geopower. And in fact, here I will invoke the work of feminist artist Mira Ladrman-Ukeles, who already in 1967, in her proposal for maintenance art exhibition, says there's a section of the exhibition that's called Care, and it consists of 3 parts: personal, general, and earth maintenance. So it is about performing across these 3 registers of territories, and this is 2 decades actually before Guattari's 3 ecologies even. So, so caring labor is essentially something that does and must involve earth. And recently Maria Puig de la Bella Casa has published a book around notion as care as natural cultural labor, where she deterritorializes the discussions of ethics of care and looks at it as a kind of multi-species enactment in line with, I would say, endosymbiogenesis in Lynn Margulis and sympoids in Donna Haraway. But again, I think it's really important to kind of highlight and emphasize here that actually, and to try to tease the specifics of how this relates to like other beings, earth others. So because anyways, these movements, so we do not include earth others into politics of care, ethics of care. That is one way of looking at it. So it's not about including anything. The point is to somehow, I think, deterritorialize this field and actually to relate it to a much broader field, which has always already been there and is going to be always already there, which is these modes of care, desire, yearning, and affect that actually have been the ones that produced the plant, the animal, that actually so many beings have been involved for so long before us, and that we are newcomers in every sense here. And to be really, to keep the kind of any kind of theorizing around this very humble, and to actually try to see this as always a small island within a much broader field of reproduction, which actually is also the one that actually keeps us going in every possible way. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to say a thing or breathe for a second. So pollination, oxygen, carbon dioxide, respiration of plants, pooing in the wild or in the freedom of most animals. These are all expressions of actually of specific modes of reproduction. But also art can be seen actually as such, as Elizabeth Gross explains, that actually art is this surplus of energy that actually is developed. It is not necessary for survival, but art and and specifically she relates to bodily expressions of animals mainly, but of course we can think here about plants as well, but possibly also inorganic beings. Art has to do with sexuality and this surplus that is kind of mobilized in order to create some sort of affect and desire and so on. So to kind of bring this back to our current problematic here, so how to stand with rocks, how to work for earth justice that includes non-organic others, because there have been obviously major advances in both theorizing around animals and plants, but it still seems a little bit and practice such as animal rights and so on. But how can we grasp these lytic cycles, because they are seemingly so alien? How can we actually really work towards some sort of commons with bodies that effectively come from other space-times and possibly move in a very different zones? But only seemingly so, because actually it should go without saying that animal bodies, including human and plant bodies, cannot at all function without inorganic beings, such as copper, iron, magnesium, zinc, potassium, calcium, phosphorus. So if we follow Spinoza's common notions, humans are already deeply involved with minerals in joyful associations, because, essentially animals cannot survive and plants without this type of traffic, and that minerals make possible. So, and on another level, this is on the interior side, more or less, or in the traffic with the, what we could say, natural environment. But now here we are looking at the expressions of this. I think that high-tech humans are even more so spellbound to the mineral elements, and in fact we are glued to the screens made from rare earths, which could be understood also as fires, actually powers coming from the underground, and our fingers actually massage ever so more sensually these interfaces. So an average information communication device of today, a phone or computer chip, contains almost all stable elements found on Earth, more than 60. So they're all extracted through a comprehensive cycles of extraction and production and gathered into these, into our pockets actually. So they have been summoned and they are not going away actually, as it's becoming increasingly obvious, as we can see with toxicities that have their own trajectories and dam disasters and mining dam disasters. So they do not go away easily as well. Which relates to some degree, I think, also to the powers that they do have and transmit or interact with us. So these asymmetrical entanglements are more intense now than ever, thanks to scientific capitalism. So this is then the point where actually it is increasingly clear that all these bodies are not only mobilized for our purposes or the purposes of information communication or for what they were designed. This is a very limited view, because they do not work only for us. But better said, they yes, work with us, yes, in a very asymmetrical mode mostly. But how else actually? That's still not precise enough in some extent. I think it's really more about finding more precise ways to describe this kind of complicated relationship, actually, or strange loves, to quote Depeche Mode here. So, what if these Earth others are effectively part of these histories of proletarianization as well, to the point of exhaustion, and with them, of course, the waters, the air, the soil. And here it doesn't really matter that they don't speak our tongues, this kind of probably obsolete definition of politics, because affects and much more important things than speech are being shared now. These powers that are made possible with minerals are interacted continuously. We are inside these apparatuses. So how is this multi-species inorganic class to be composed? And this some concluding thoughts essentially, because again, this is the type of work that can only be collectivized and done with many bodies. So I cannot really propose any specific formation here, but just point that, for example, if we take another Deleuze and Guattari's insights that relates to affect. They say, quote, a racehorse is more different from a workhorse than a workhorse is from an ox. And here they use Spinoza's ethology, which is the study of affects, to actually think topologically about what brings beings together. And now to stay with, and now this is absolutely not to inferiorize the workers, but it's actually it is said from a proletarian point that actually it is good to be closer to an ox in this case. So a person, a human person living in proximity of a rare earth mineral deposit, for example, is more different from the capitalist investor than Z is from a mineral deposit. So in the current distribution of powers, actually some humans are so much more topologically distant from the others, and species lines do not stand, because what brings together, in this case, for example, minerals and humans, are common vulnerabilities, porosities, and perhaps even desires and yearnings. Likewise, a miner is more proximate effectively to the stone than to the capitalist owner of the mine. So this is the uncommon ground for organizing, actually. And I think from this type of understanding of topology, affective topology, and interaction, it is possible to start deconstructing and reconstructing class theory within a broader ecology. Therefore, political economy becomes a singular aspect within actually a much broader field of intersections between vulnerability, viscous porosity, exposure, desire, radical openness, yearning. So together with the 1,000 tiny sexes, as invoked by Aaron Saldana, 1,000 tiny races, 1,000 tiny sexes as invoked by Elizabeth Gross, and in resonance with the 1,000 tiny intersections as developed by Rick Dolphine and Iris van der Toyn. I think also it is really about starting to work actively towards the development of 1,000 tiny and not so tiny classes of beings, together with the still existing dualisms between, or struggles between capitalist bourgeoisie and the proletariat precariat. It is about introducing also a broader field of struggle and class interaction and alliance with 1,000 multi-species classes that bring together entities and beings with people that are close to the land, the waters, the forests, the proletarians, the precarious, the migrants, the displaced, the landless, the peasants. Dana Luciano and Mel Chen asked in 2015, quote, when the subhuman, inhuman, non-human queer actively connects with the other than human, what might that connection spawn? So Rosie Braidotti has already invoked notion of zooproletarians. Catriona Sandiland, speaking here 2 years ago, mentioned vegetariat. But again, I think it's also really not about developing its notions of subjectivity, but it's really about staying with the quality of relations. Actually, so it is to develop these onto-power formations to the notion of class as a set of relations, actually. So that involve these bodies, but it's not that we have these and these and these, but it's really they're in a specific place, and it always has to be a place thought, situated thought. There is a specific mode of class organizing, and class here then also can be enriched and diffracted with notions of such as assemblage or community, specifically also because community and assemblage are used, for example, in ecology in very different ways than in social sciences. And some of that work is being done, and there is a forthcoming article I co-wrote with Sam Skinner that looks at this specifically. So that there is a whole other constellation of terms that can be brought into understanding of class and kind of to really do this work. But it's really about, I think, essentially how to develop this minoritarian ecological ontopolitics also as a very different type of territory where it's not where the intent is not, where this kind of struggle or should also be transformed into essentially, like with Margulis and Haraway, resistance comes first with Deleuze, but with Margulis and Haraway we see that actually symbiosis comes first, actually, and competition only after. So also the notion of class struggle here means specifically, first and foremost, class assembly is the process of desire and yearning, where bodies do come together and try to find ways to fit together. They try to find their mode of spatial justice, to say it with Andreas Philippopoulos, Michalopoulos. So, and only when these bodies are encroached, there is also something which is then becomes class struggle. So the history is more complicated, but it is about class assembly, symbiosis, symbiogenesis, sympoetics, and class struggle understood in leftist Marxist tradition. And these are entangled terms, but it is essential to attend to these modes of assembly actually first, because they are still to a large degree invisibilized, because this type of politics is not about becoming stronger or winning over a state or better working conditions, or it is only that in part. It is specifically about challenging also the ideas of competition, both biological and capitalist, or even survival actually as core qualities. It is about resisting power as hierarchy in all its instantiations, so power over, and staying with the weak and staying weak as a minoritarian ecology ethos. So it is about associations in queer non-identity and multiple belongings, cyborg resilience with Cecilia Osberg as ongoing differentiation, regeneration, and vulnerability that affirmatively means multi-species openness and care, debility that means differential affectivities, and ecology of sensation with Anna Hickey-Moody. Because finally, as Luciano and Chen say, all life, we might say, is now precarious life, end quote. And to say this again, I would say all Earth, living and non-living, is now precarious, has always been and always will be. The effective labor of Earth care, maintenance, and the politics of it is about maintaining the precarious conditions in common, the specific indeterminations that signify the zones of coexistence for multiple bodies. Because I believe that when a life, any form of life, is too strong, too secure, securitized, this always comes at an expense of some other bodies. So living justly on Earth is about being accountable, responsible to mutual precarities between classes and assemblages, and working actively on organizing to sustain each other through these vulnerabilities. This is about building minoritarian apparatuses, as I call them. So assemblies that are always oriented towards minoritization and then the withdrawal of any form of power over. So to kind of make quantum leaps from the logics of accumulation and extraction towards a pluriverse, which, as I've learned from the companions Prava Pilar and Alex Wilson, indigenous scholars from the Americas, pluriverse, as used by Zapatistas, is the notion of the possibility where many worlds coexist. Thank you.